Morning, thank you everybody. I'm just going to test is my clicker working, it is. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Yes, I work at Ark Schools. I've been there for about almost a year now, and I'm leading on our approach to data and systems across the whole MAT. For those of you that don't know Ark, we are a relatively large multi-academy trust. We've currently got, this says 35, I think it's already out of date, we're now 36. Schools across mainly Birmingham, London, and then a few schools on the south coast. That's rising. We've got another 3 or 4 schools joining us in the next 12 months, and we've got some new starter schools that will be opening over the next 2 years. And Ark tends to work in areas where there is high social deprivation. We tend to have a much higher proportion of disadvantaged students across our schools. And most of the schools that join us are in the bottom third of schools nationally when they join us, and then we support them in taking them on a journey of school improvement during the time that they, well, from the moment that they join us. And each of our new start schools have been rated good or outstanding, 7 of which were outstanding, and 9 in 10 of our transition schools have improved outcomes relative to national. And I think a key component of that transition and transformation and improvement has been around our approach and strategies for data. So we've thought a lot about how we use data and why we use data, and particularly within the context of workload, we want to make sure that our schools and our teachers aren't overburdened with having to think about what data they use. And I think that all of the things that we do around data are based very much around a simple premise, which I'm just going to share with you now. So often we start with the data that we've got, and then we will start to make inferences. And a bad example of how you might do this is here. So you've got a list, a primary school teacher might have a list of everyone's favourite colour, and then they think to themselves, I wonder if, we've been doing this unit on whatever it is, I wonder if anything to do with the colour that they like. This is very, very sort of terrible example, but it illustrates the point well. I wonder if the colour correlates with grades, and then they spend time looking at it, and then they realise that it doesn't, and then they haven't prepared their students, and we end up with this situation where we've had some data and we've used it for the wrong things to make inferences that aren't correct, which have no validity and don't mean anything to us as a network. So we've started from the other way around. So a better example, I want each student to perform better in biology within my school. I need to focus, therefore, my reteach on the right topics for each of my students, which means I need to know which students failed which topics, and therefore I need to have some detailed analysis of how they've done on each of the questions so that we can do it. This is what it would look like within an Ark school. So really importantly, we've tried to stop thinking, what data do we have, and start thinking, what data do we need? So this is very much based around the work from Dylan William on what data to collect, and this notion of decision-driven data collection rather than data-driven decision-making. And obviously, the DFE are tackling this through some of the work that they've done on eliminating unnecessary workload. There are 4 papers, I think, across how to reduce workload in different areas, and I think they're just embarking on a new review of all of that work as well. So this is our approach. We've got the notion that we want to achieve great results in our schools. So the question might be, what are the outcomes that we want each school to achieve? We then know that there's going to have to be some informed action that takes place. So what questions should we be asking in order to drive the actions that we would like? This means we need to do some high quality analysis. So how do we want to see this information presented? Because the informed action, depending on who you are in a school, the data that you need to see is quite different. And obviously we need to make sure we've got the right data in order to perform that analysis. So this is our approach, and Romcom is increasingly a partner in us leveraging the opportunities to do this well. We've also got our in-house tool, which has been sort of a decade in the creation, which we are now looking and working and trying to look at other systems and other people that we can work with to get better data into our system, and to make it easier for teachers to get data into our system. But it's very much driven this way around. So we want to achieve great results, but we know that rather than just trying to collect everything and have quite a significant burden on teachers and staff in schools, we want to only collect and use the things that we need. So that means we've looked at what we think people need. And I know that Derek later on is going to talk a little bit about how across the mat this works, and I'm going to try and focus on what we do within school rather than across the mat to leverage the data that we've got. So firstly, we've tried to work out what are the questions that different people within a school will need to be asking. And we've then worked from there to decide what data do we need to collect in order to do that, and what systems do we need to use in order to collect that data, and then what does that look like when we put it in front of them on a dashboard, in a report, etc. And I think a really interesting thing there is we're starting to think much more carefully about that format in which we give someone the information. So a classroom teacher doesn't necessarily want complicated dashboards that they've got to interrogate. They would much prefer to have a standard report, a sheet that's just got some information about their class. That's very different to what a head of department needs, because they want to interrogate, they want to look, they want to analyse, they want to drill down between classes. So we've sort of defined the key questions that we've got. And some of them are centred around the student. So these are the key questions that we believe are associated with student. So within a subject, how are they doing? How are they doing relative to where they were, relative to where they need to be? Across subjects, are we seeing patterns? This is all stuff that you guys know. But I think that the point that we've now reached is we can, across the network, leverage this information so it looks identical to everybody in every school. And then similarly, the important school questions are across progress and attainment, safeguarding, destinations, staff, and finance. And so we do now collect data across all of these things. And I think that from a school level, we're able to design, I mean, it's a lot more obvious. And within a school, we can use this sort of framework to support school improvement and interventions. I think at a network level, we can do exactly the same, because we create something called, we've got the Ark model, we have dashboards to support it that meet these different criteria. And if, say, we've got a transition school and we transfer all their data from their MIS into our in-house data warehouse, we're able to see really quickly where they need support straight away. And this is an example of what that looks like, just so that you can see what a network level view of a school dashboard would look like. So this is a secondary school. It's got some info on English and maths attainment, teaching and learning progress by year group. So really quickly, at a glance, this information just comes from predominantly the MIS. And then over here, we've got some info that comes in from PSF, our finance system. And this stuff, we've designed some of our own forms to capture some of the other information that we need, such as student enrolment, pathways, enrichment over here, where we ask and try and get better information about where our students go. And this is what it looks like for a primary school. So you can see that we've got a very standardised way of showing our senior management the information that they need at a glance, all gathered from data systems, our MIS. So I wanted to just run through a quick example to show how this might work in practice. So we want to say that year 11 this year needs to get 75% achieving English and Maths 4 and above. I think the school that I was looking at here, their last year's was 68. Some informed action. Where's the risk? In terms of the crossover, is it English, is it Maths? And so I can see, looking at this, just to answer those questions, I know that actually progress is pretty good in English, progress is less good in Maths. My issue is Maths. So what do I need to know now? Well, I need to understand which students or groups are underachieving. So we have a dashboard that shows us that. And so here I have teaching groups. I've got above, at, and below progress. I've got what our current grades are in terms of attainment and their age-related grades. And here I've got whether or not they're above, at, or below their target grade. And I can have a look at this and I can start to see, okay, well, actually, my students at the bottom end in my class 4 and 5, my bottom sets are the ones where actually if you look at progress, they're on negative progress. This is all live data from one of our schools for their current year 11. And I now know that I've got something that I need to do. So in terms of the very granular level data, what data do I have to be able to make those inferences and to provide those dashboards? We've got student level data, GDPR compliant student level data, because I've taken away their names. Information here about that class, and this would be the bit that the teacher has. So we can see that we've got something which a HOD might have on the previous slide, which is that sort of higher level across all the groups, or a senior leader might want it. We've then got a student level information, and I can start to see now who are the individual students that I need to work with. And then if we go a step back, how did I get this data in the first place? This is a bottom tier maths paper that was sat across the network in spring 2. And every single question, we can see for one of those groups what percentage of students got the question right and what the network average was, the Ark average. So is it just a really hard question, or actually is it just us that aren't very good at it, answering those questions? So you can see here, they've exceeded the Ark average, so well done, teacher, you've taught that topic well, but there are some other issues over here. And then it will allow the school to make different, better inferences around what the issue is with those students and those groups. So, and the way that we collect this is through mark sheets, which we then centrally analyse. So we pull all of the information from the various systems that we use to be able to capture that all in one place. So that's just a sort of practical example of how within a school we sort of start bottom up with the data and collect the data that we think we need and use it across lots of different places. And I think the key question that I sometimes, that I do get asked about this is the workload associated with submitting question level marks, because that feels like probably a lot of work. And of course that does need to happen. Teachers do need to submit subject level marks for questions. But actually when you look at how we can leverage that data across the network, the question that you've got to ask is, is the effort that you put into collecting the data, do you get enough out the other side to make it worthwhile? And I think that we do, both in terms of the fact that we are able to really clearly see what support schools, teachers, students need, but we're also able to leverage that across the network. Because, for example, if we know that, let's look at some of these questions here, where I don't know what topic that was, but there is a sort of, you can hover over these and see what the topic is. Whatever topic this is here, it's clear that we've got a deficit of knowledge, or an inference we could make is that there's a deficit of knowledge within the maths team or within that maths teacher to be able to teach that topic effectively. We could compare it across within school to see if that's true, but that actually across the network, we have got the knowledge to be able to deliver and teach that topic, not brilliantly, but better than it is here. And we're enabling that. So we're using, and we're actually just using SharePoint is quite straightforward. We're enabling and leveraging that ability to share across the network, which hopefully then saves teachers time elsewhere. So they've put some time into collecting data, but they can leverage other people's resources where they can see across the network that perhaps the quality of their resources is better elsewhere. So what does this look like, sort of back end? And the sort of key principles? Well, one is this notion of having multi-school consolidation. It makes worthwhile all of the data collection that we do if we can share it across schools and leverage across schools, as I've just described. We pull in data from a range of different places, so from our MIS, from Bromcom, but we also pull in some other data where some cases it's just spreadsheets where we've got an Excel form where we've gathered some data, let's say about student destinations or about enrollment, just very simple forms. We then gather and aggregate that, and we use Tableau for some of our data viz, and so you can join multiple sources together. Assessment at scale. So last year was the first year that we introduced standardized assessments across every year group, across every key stage, across every subject. And that's sort of in pilot. We're sort of expanding that and developing that as we go. Having some automated business logic, so trying to work out, well, if you're in the 35th percentile, what grade do we think that means your age-related grade is across the network, so we can give people graded scores as well. We pull in the national benchmarking data. We have, and hopefully you can see that there's a sort of consistent look and feel to the viz that we've got so that everything makes sense to everybody, and consistent colour coding. We have drill down where we can so that people can go and look into the data in a bit more detail. And we try and make sure that everything prints and exports in a friendly way. So just a quick summary of each of those is there's your data, people who are sort of visual learners, how all of that pulls together. We blend the data from the different instances of the MIS. As I said, combine it with some CSVs, XLS. We use GL assessments. We use Puma Pira. We get that data. We just bung it all into the same place. So when we do that from CSVs, mostly, although increasingly now with things like assembly or group caller wands, you can pull that data in automatically. We combine some of our HR data. Finance, I said, we use PSF. Actually, that just spits out as a CSV file that we can just play around with, and anything else. And we're at different stages with different systems at the moment. In terms of the assessment piece, the assessment at scale that I refer to, that's basically what it looks like in its simplest form. We've just got standard questions. They're, if you read the sort of work of Becky Allen and others around good assessment design, they're blind, so the teachers can't teach to the test. They don't know what it looks like. So it's the truest picture that we can possibly get around relative performance. Whether or not we are able to make absolute judgments is a bigger question, but the relative performance we can measure. We've got very clear, and each school subscribes to exactly the same cycle around assessment and what we do, and the expectations are really clear about what we collect and what schools get back. We're able to do some benchmarking, and increasingly, we're using the tools. A lot of this stuff is in-house because things didn't exist elsewhere, and there weren't products available. We're increasingly not doing this in-house and increasingly using third-party tools like the Bromcom reporting tools and other tools to get some of this information. And then the consistent viz, I think, is crucial for us. We know that whichever school it is, we've got really clear standard. They look confusing at first, but once you've understood how they work, you always know how to look at any school, any key stage, any subject. They just look identical. And the interactive drill down there, so you can hover, you can click in, and you can explore further. And there's some custom reports, but it's essentially very driven and wouldn't work if we didn't have high quality data in our MIS and in the other systems that we use, some of the other tracking data systems. So, and that's it really. I hope it's just a sort of high level view of how a large MAT is working to standardize our approaches to data in an environment where we're constantly worrying about workload and thinking about how we do this stuff better without it being a significant burden on our schools and on colleagues. So how do they get something back for the time that they're spending doing their assessments and collecting data?